Hello and welcome to the Art of Being Human. As you know, we've been talking about emotions and how to overcome those painful emotions of depression and anxiety. And I'm going to start off this morning by telling you that you need to remember that emotions are not just states of feeling, they're states of being. Your body responds physically to the emotions that you are having. And if you're in a feeling state of depression, your body reacts in a certain way as opposed to the way that it's going to act if you're elated about something. So remember, it's not just a feeling or just some passing thing. It is actually a state of being that you are experiencing when you're experiencing different kinds of emotions. But I want to talk to you about how emotions change you. And I'm going to tell you a couple of true stories as to what happened to two people when they experienced things that were uncomfortable for them. And the first one is about a man who was a missionary, and he went to Colombia. And he was captured by a couple of people in a guerrilla outfit, and so he was taken hostage by a guerrilla force. And he was held for about 810 days before he was released. Now, he doesn't talk much about what happened in the 810 days, and I don't know why he was even released. But he was released, and as a result of that, he developed a good case of PTSD. Now, PTSD is post-traumatic stress disorder, and it will happen if you have had a traumatic event happen to you. And I can imagine in captivity where he couldn't get out when he wanted to, and heaven knows what happened to him if he was tortured or something when he was in captivity. I can just imagine there was a lot of trauma going on. And if you either experience trauma or if you have seen trauma and somebody else experience it, you can still get it. So you've either experienced the traumatic events yourself, or you have seen other people experience traumatic events. I can remember when I had come upon an accident. The accident had nothing to do with me. I was not involved in the accident at all. But I can remember that as I came upon it, the police were there. A girl was screaming. There was a lady inside the car that was unconscious. And I think that the lady that was screaming thought that the other lady was dead. I'm not sure. But she screamed and screamed, "Wake up, wake up, wake up." And the person did not wake up. The ambulance was on the way. I was just stopped because of the accident. But as I said, I wasn't involved in any way, but I could see her reactions. This would have been such a traumatic event that it would not be unusual if she had a case of PTSD. And I don't know what happened to everybody else. The ambulance came, everybody was taken away, and I never was able to find out what happened in the long run. Whether the unconscious woman made it or whether she didn't make it, I don't know. But any kind of traumatic event, and remember, what's traumatic for one person may not be traumatic for another person. They just is going to be trauma. And so if it's a traumatic event, then you're going to find that you could get a case of PTSD, or if you've seen it, you get a piece of PTSD. Now, this man that was held captive for 810 days, that was 22 years ago, and he still has PTSD, and he can't get rid of it. It's with him all the time. Now, I don't know how much help he's had, but he would need to have therapy of some kind to help him get over it. But these are the things that happened to him as a part of his PTSD. These are his symptoms. First of all, he has paranoid thoughts. Paranoia is when you think somebody's after you, or maybe it's a group of people after you. A paranoid person is afraid that they're going to be caught or they're going to be hurt by somebody. Somebody's out to get them, and it's not really very logical. But naturally, having been captured, he would be afraid of sudden movements or anyone getting too close and things like that, because it could be a sign that maybe someone was going to pick him up or someone was going to grab him. So at any rate, he has these paranoid thoughts. He has intrusive memory, memory that you can't get rid of. And intrusive memory is when you constantly think of something, you can't get rid of it. All of a sudden it's in your mind and you just can't get rid of it. And it also brings fear and it brings anger. And then if somebody is talking to him, then he wants to run. If someone is talking to him and is beside him, he wants to run because he can't be so close to anybody. Who knows what kind of hurt they will have? And he's hypervigilant. Now, to be hypervigilant means that he's watching everything. I know a friend of mine who used to go to the bank and use the ATMs, and she was hypervigilant. And the ATM could be right in front of her, and she was going to use it, and her head is darting in different directions, and she's looking around. She has to scan everything in her eyes in order to make sure that she's safe and somebody's not watching her, or somebody's not trying to get her for identity theft or something like that. And so he was hypervigilant, then not able to concentrate. He scans his surrounding for signs of danger. That's a part of the hypervigilance he has. He gets angry for no reason. Well, of course, there is a reason because of the fact that he's still reacting to the fact that he was captured. But he has these anger feelings. He feels guilty for no reason. And the guilt comes from somehow he couldn't stop them from capturing him. And so somehow that turns out to be his fault, which of course it's not. So he has the anger and he has the guilt. He has nightmares and he wakes up. He's not sure where he is. So let me read down these. These are typical symptoms that come with PTSD, and I'm just going to read them over again without comment. He has paranoid thoughts, intrusive memory, and he wants to run if anyone's close to him. He's hypervigilant. He can't concentrate. He scans his surroundings for signs of danger. He gets angry. He gets guilty. He has nightmares, and he wakes up and he's not sure where he is. This is the way it is for PTSD. I can remember that my sister was talking to me over the phone, and someone was trying to break into her house. And she was frightened, and I stopped the conversation. I said, call the police. She called the police, and the police came and took him off. He was having flashbacks from his experiences in Vietnam. He thought for a moment he was still in Vietnam, and he was a fighter. And so therefore he was fighting for the cause he was fighting for the American cause, and he was out of it. He was transported to another dimension, the dimension of still being in Vietnam, even though he was back in his hometown, he had returned. So it can do an awful job to you, and if you have that, then you really need to have help with it. The symptoms for this man has never gone away, and 71% of anyone who is a healthcare worker or a missionary or anyone who goes to West Africa, anyone who experiences PTSD, 71% have experienced traumatic events. Now, not everyone who experiences bad traumatic events will get PTSD, but there are some people who will. And what will happen is they will feel overwhelmed. They will have their normal coping experiences undermined. They're not able to cope. They will have fear. They will have helplessness, and they will feel horror. There's something that the mind brings it back. Now remember, I talked to you, maybe a couple of sessions ago, about opening up that memory box when you relive your past pain. And that's no scientific term, I just kind of created it for your ease of understanding it. But there is a part of the brain that remembers everything, all of our experiences, both good and bad. And it also, we experience everything, or we remember all of the bad and all of the emotions that go along with the experience. And so therefore we not only remember the experience, but we re-experience all of the emotions that go with it. And so we can go into, that can open up, that brain can open up, and it can share with us all of the things we want to forget. And we may forget them partially, but under certain circumstances, those memories come back, and those memories can be terribly, terribly painful. People who work with poor people in areas of the world where there's a lot of women who are assaulted every day, they develop something that's called a secondary trauma. And what happens is that the work is, it kind of works on the brain. Their brains become intertwined with the trauma that these women feel when they've been assaulted. And they work and work and work until they're exhausted. And then they still work, and then they can't work anymore because finally their brain just stopped. One female worker could not stop crying, and she could not eat, and she could not sleep. And her body was shutting down because of the secondary trauma and something that's called compassion fatigue. When you have such compassion and feeling for people that you keep working with them and working with them, even when you go beyond your own personal resources to put up with it, you still do it until finally the body tries to shut down. And also, it takes months to recover. This particular girl who had the secondary trauma spent months. She had to go to another country and just recover and get therapy and help, and then finally she did return to do the kind of work that she did before. But she did in the process learn a lot about coping skills and when you can't do anymore and when you have to say no. So you just don't go over that line. It's important to know that. Now, I'm going to talk about another case here. This is a second story. I'm going to call this girl Joan. That's not her real name, of course, but she was a college student. And as a college student, she was getting ready for graduation, and she had to go through exams, and she had to go through finals, and she also had to write a paper. Now, something about the paper, she doesn't explain what the paper was on, but something in the paper caused her to become very, very nervous. It opened up some issue with her that she had not yet resolved, and so it was a paper that touched upon something that was personally bothering her, and she went into a very bad anxiety reaction. She was very upset. She couldn't eat, she couldn't sleep, she couldn't study, she couldn't do anything. And so it triggered her, and she went into her past pain, and whatever it was she was reliving, she couldn't put a stop to it. So she would have flunked out or not been able to complete the semester. But what happened was she went to a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist gave her Klonopin. Now, Klonopin is in a class of drugs called benzodiazepines, and Klonopin is like Xanax and Ativan and another group of drugs which are in that same class, and they're wonderful for anxiety. She felt wonderful on it, but the doctor was wise. He only gave her a 2-week supply, and then after that 2 weeks, just enough to get her through the exam and the paper, and then she was supposed to go back and get therapy and find out why that paper bothered her so much and what happened that it made her not able to function. But she decided she did not want to do that, and she found a way to get more Klonopin, and she kept taking Klonopin more and more and more. And if you take too much, it can be it can be addictive. And so she went way beyond the 2 weeks. Now, the doctor did it right. He did not give her too much by any means, but she just kept taking it and found a way to get it. So she started drinking. She lost part of her memory. She started talking really bad, harsh comments about other people and not knowing why she was doing it. And her friends were concerned, and her father was frantic because he'd done some research on Klonopin and knew that if you mix it with other things, it can be very addictive. Most people don't get hooked on Klonopin. If you take too much of it, you can, but most people don't get hooked on it. But what they tend to do is mix it with something else, and then the action of the two drugs or the several several drugs together can really do a horrible thing. And so Klonopin although it was an okay drug, should not have been used in the way that she was doing it. Now, what the benzodiazepines do, sometimes called benzos, they tend to depress breathing, and they're dangerous when they're combined with opioids and or alcohol or other drugs. They're usually not abused, but they can be abused. Now, finally, she did go to a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist said he could wean her off. He could wean her off the benzodiazepine, but it would be kind of a tough go. But she went through with the treatment, and she got over it, and then she became all right after that. So you cannot do a lot with drugs and expect that your emotions are not going to be affected, because they will be. Drugs change you, and there's no such thing as a safe drug. Now, anger can also change you, and I'm going to read a little something from T.D. Jakes. T.D. Jakes is an author. He's one of my favorite authors, and he talks a lot about handling your emotions and handling your life, and he actually has very good advice. So I want to read this. This comes from one of his books, and this is what he says. I've shortened it a little bit. I think it's a book called Before You Do. This is what he says. One day, while moving through the house, I glanced up at a window and, to my shock, saw an angry man snarling at me. I thought he must have been an attacker about to break in. I leapt with clenched fists to release an assault on him. As I struck the glass, I was shocked to hear it shatter and find out it was not a window at all, but a mirror I had hit. The angry guy who I had seen was only a reflection of myself staring back at me. So you can see even his expression, even his countenance changed with the anger that he had. So how do you know when your anxiety is getting too high? I'm going to list a couple of questions, a few questions, and you may be able to pinpoint yourself as to whether these questions are applicable to you. So either yes or no, just kind of think about these as I read them off. I think I have about enough time to do this. Are you fearful without knowing why? Do you worry about 1,000 things during the day? Do situations cause your heart to race? Or do you feel like you're smothering and you can't get enough air? Do you suddenly feel lightheaded and disconnected? That's usually a dissociative response. Some people feel taller than they really are. Some people feel shorter, but you feel different. You feel like the size and the shape of your body is not the same. Do you suddenly feel, well, I asked you that. Are you tired and irritable when you wake up? Do you have trouble going to sleep or staying asleep? If you have trouble going to sleep or staying asleep, it indicates anxiety and depression. Are you fearful to the point where you think you're going to die? There are some people that are so fearful that they think they're having a heart attack. I was, and I've told the story before, but I think I have time to say it again. I was, as a college professor, working in my office one day, and all of a sudden I heard a blood-curdling scream, the loudest scream I think I've ever heard, and it was from a female. I jumped up out of my chair and I ran out into the hall, figuring maybe she was being attacked, although we didn't have those kinds of problems in the college where I was teaching. And there she was, all alone, screaming. Nobody was with her. Nobody was attacking her. And I took her in my office and talked with her, and she suddenly had such serious panic. She didn't know where it came from. She didn't know what it was connected with, but suddenly she was just overwhelmed with feelings of anxiety and fear, and they were so strong she couldn't stand it, so she started screaming. So, and some people do have such anxiety that they're afraid that they're going to die. Do you avoid people because they make you uncomfortable? Do you think all the time that things are going to go wrong? You know, we can worry about all kinds of things, careers, jobs, our livelihoods, our looks, our health. but this is something that we have to deal with, and it's something that we can deal with. So I don't have too much time left, and well, let me read one definition I do have time for this. I want to read a definition of anxiety that comes from a textbook, and I'm going to shorten it after that and make it more meaningful. But one definition of anxiety is this: a painful or apprehensive uneasiness of the mind over impending or anticipated ill, a fearful, overwhelming apprehension and fear marked by physical signs like sweating and tension, by doubt concerning the nature of the threat and about your capability of coping with it. Now, I'm going to kind of shorten this up a bit. My own definition: it's a fear of things in life, apprehensions of things that are happening to you now, or apprehension of things that are going to be happening to you, which are anticipatory, because there is anticipatory anxiety, and panic over certain situations. So let me read my definition again. A fear of things in life, apprehensions over things present, or anticipatory of things happening in the future, or panic in certain situations. You can be angry and you can be upset over everything. Everything that you do, you can be afraid of anything. You can have phobias over anything. You can have panic over anything. It would be symbolic of whatever your situation is. Nonetheless, it is something that you need to deal with and something that you can get help with. Depression and anxiety are very, very easily treated. You don't have to put up with it. And I just kind of want to point you to the way that you can get the help that you need. So I'm going to close it here. We'll continue with this next time. Please join me then.